All right, this should be day 4. We're going to do some more immune function stuff. This is super important. This is our most powerful part of our immune system. It's not the quickest, but it is certainly the most specifically targeted and the most powerful. It's the part of your immune system that is augmented with vaccinations, smallpox, flu vaccines, and the like. The purposes of your adaptive immunity are to identify specific things and attack them. Not just generically going after anything that's there, but you're identifying a specific target and then making a whole bunch of cells that can come in and attack that target. Infectious microorganisms that don't die due to the basic inflammation and complement system attack. So it takes a little bit of a while to signal this part of the immune system to come in to help a little bit later. Long-term protective protection against antigens, such as if you have a vaccine or you've had a disease before, you develop antibodies that may last a lifetime and will always help you fight that disease if it shows up again. So it's inducible. That means that it can be created when something arrives. It's specific. It goes specifically after an antigen, a particular molecule type that is on the surface of a bacterium or a virus or something. And what you make are antibodies, okay? You make antibodies to help, and you also make particular other types of lymphocytes, T cells, that can attack the bacteria directly. So we're going to be making T cells and B cells, making the cells. The T cells will attack directly. The B cells will make antibodies. Then you make the antibodies. The antibodies are not cells. They go through the blood, attach to the antigen, attach to the bacterium, and make it a target for the rest of your immune system. So we have a humoral component. Those are the antibodies floating around in your bloodstream. Those are made by B cells that have fully matured into what are called plasma cells. So B cells will make antibodies, B. T cells have a couple of different kinds. One actually just helps out the B cells to do the right job. But other types of T cells, killer T cells, cytotoxic T cells, will actually attack the bacteria and viruses and kill them directly. Active immunity means you get exposed to a new antigen on the virus, the surface of a virus, the surface of the wrong kind of blood cell if you get a transfusion of the wrong blood type, or bacterium or something. So that antigen shows up, you signal the immune system, the lymphatic part of your immune system, the lymphocytes carried in your lymph nodes. You signal these B cells that that antigen has shown up, and that B cell makes antibodies specific to that antigen. Passive immunity means you're already immune, either from your mom or from being sick before or from a vaccine, and so you already have the B cells making those antibodies already. So when it shows up, it just works. So you either have to actively produce them from scratch, or you already have them because you have some sort of immunity. So an antigen is just a generator of an anti-response or an immune response. And these are molecules. I mean, the bacteria and viruses don't want to have them on them, but they are. I mean, every structure, I have molecules on me that are different from yours. If you put some of my tissue in you, you will attack it because I have some kind of an anti-generator molecule. So there's an antigen, and a lot of our cells, especially our immune cells, have receptors that will bind anything that's foreign and then respond to it. So on the surface of the invader, you have antigens. It will bind to an antigen receptor on an immune cell or some other types of cells. It will sometimes attach to what's called a dendritic cell. These dendritic cells are specifically designed to sit there in the tissue. When an antigen comes in contact with them, they grab the antigen, go into the lymphatic system, and take it to the B cells. So now the B cell has that antigen, binds to that B cell. The B cell starts making antibodies for that antigen. So it's a great plan. You take the antigen, deliver it to a B cell so it can start making the antibodies. Then the B lymphocytes, the B cells, start making the antibodies. The antibodies then are released into the bloodstream. They bind to the surface to these antigens. The antibody knows what antigen to look for. The antibody binds to the surface of the bad guys and provides a docking station for all of your immune cells, your neutrophils and stuff, an attractant so that they come, a binding site so they'll bind and devour that bacterium. If your leukocyte, your white blood cell, doesn't recognize the bad guy, it'll go right past it. But once the antibody sticks onto it, it can't go by. It will stop and bind and eat it, and it makes it hundreds of times more directly effective in killing those bacteria. Several kinds of antibodies. They're also called immunoglobulins. A globulin is a blood-borne, substance. So your immunoglobulins are your antibodies. We have immunoglobulin G, immunoglobulin A, M, D, and E. Some are more specific, some are more general, some are more prolific than others. They look like space-age docking stations with binding sites all over them. So they can bind to an antigen, they can bind to a B cell, they can bind to a complement. Some of them will bind to a bacterium and attract one of the complements that's a killer too. And so as soon as one of these guys sticks onto a bacterium or a virus, it's a target for your all sorts of immune cells. And here you have a couple of side chains that are the actual bindings. And so the antibody, which is actually a fairly complicated structure, binds to the antigen, which also can be a funky structure. But then it has a binding site for a killer T cell, for a neutrophil, for a complement that will come in and now be attached to the antigen and kill whatever it's attached to. Antibodies have a couple of ways they can function. They can directly neutralize a bacterium or a virus. They can neutralize the toxin that is produced by the virus, and I'll show you in a second kind of how they do that. They can cause clumping of bacteria, or especially of red blood cells. If you get the wrong blood type, it causes what's called agglutination. And those red blood cells that are the wrong kind all clump together. They may precipitate out of solution. In that case, it's not good for you because it causes a blood clot that might kill you. But, it's designed to work not on blood because supposedly you don't have blood from somebody else evolutionarily. But it can neutralize things directly, or it can increase inflammation in the area by signaling other parts of the immune system, including mast cells. Everything communicates. It can attract neutrophils to bind and eat the bad guy, or it can activate the complement system and cause them to show up and kill. So here's, for instance, if you have a virus here and it wants to attach to this cell and kill it, if the antibody sticks onto it, it can't stick onto the cell. So it may prevent the virus from doing anything in the first place. Hopefully, it will also attract a neutrophil to come and eat this virus, but if it prevents the virus from attaching, it's done its job anyway. If the virus makes a toxin, the toxin needs to bind to the cell to kill the cell. Well, if the antibody binds to the toxin, it can prevent the toxin from getting into the cell. It can attract a complement. If some of your complement proteins and cells and things are, not cells, but structures, are killers themselves. And it can attract those. Or it can attract a neutrophil. The antibody binds here, it attracts the macrophage, gets it a place to bind. The macrophage is now going to eat the bacterium. So antibodies are extremely efficient and effective in targeting a specific bad guy and getting your immune system to kill that structure. Another thing they can do is stimulate some of your other immune cells. Everything talks to each other. So, we can bind the antigen, antibody and cause a lymphocyte to come and eat it. We already talked about that. But we can, if the antigen binds to the antibody, it can cause the antibody to bind to a mast cell. The mast cell then releases histamine and all of its other stuff that it uses to cause the inflammatory response. IgE especially turns on mast cells. It has other jobs too, but it turns on the inflammatory response. Just like the inflammatory response can signal the lymphatic response, the lymphatic cells can stimulate the inflammatory response too. Now this is good when you need it, but also if you have too many IgEs floating around, you can have an acute, allergic reaction to something and it can kill you. I think you're going to be surprised, I think I mentioned before, how many autoimmune problems there are where your own immune system winds up attacking you. IgG, immunoglobulin G, is your most common. It is the most likely to find the generic bacterium, virus, or whatever, and bind to it and cause your neutrophils and stuff to come in. I mean, IgGs can target more different, each one only targets one antigen, but it can be set up to target this kind of antigen, that one, that one, that one, that one. So it's a more ubiquitous class. IgE is really good at recognizing parasites, binding to the parasites, causing attacking cells to come in and kill the parasites. So if you have a parasitic infection, worms and things like that, IgEs will go up. If there's anything, though, that IgEs are really known for, it's stimulating mast cells to set off a histamine attack. If you are allergic to ragweed, if you're allergic to chamisa, and you respond to the antigen on those, you produce a whole bunch of IgE. It gives a whole bunch of mast cell stimulation. Histamine goes out like mad. Your eyes run, your nose runs, you cough, you wheeze, you sneeze. Okay? IgE is a big deal in inflammatory response. It's tied in with eosinophils. IgE, eosinophils, they have they both work with parasites and they both work to stimulate histamine attacks. Here we have eosinophils. They are being attracted to this parasite. The parasite antigen, though, causes your B cell to make IgE, which releases histamine from mast cells. The histamine causes the inflammatory response. It opens these cell membranes up so more eosinophils can get in, and it's kind of a positive feedback kind of thing until the parasitic infection is gone, or it's not, and you die from it. IgE, eosinophils. We have in our secretory system a considerable immune presence. We have IgA, immunoglobulin A is the most common, although there's some others in our sweat, our saliva, our mucous membranes of our airways, our earwax, our tears. All of those have immunoglobulins in them, especially IgA antibodies, to help us fight off airborne, inhaled, skin-attaching bacteria and viruses. Lacrimal glands for tears, salivary glands, the linings of the airways, the linings of the entire GI tract, our skin, our ears. Cellular immunity comes from cells directly attacking the bacteria or viruses. So the B cells are producing antibodies, but T cells, the right kind, are going to go directly and kill by direct contact. We have cytotoxic T cells, which are going to produce some sort of a toxic chemical to inject. We have killer Ts that are a kind of a subtype of cytotoxic Ts, and they will, again, have to go directly. The B cell does it from a distance, cruise missile. The T cell is the artillery. They're going to go, the guy on the ground that's going to go in and stab somebody. T cells also come as helper Ts or modulatory Ts, and these actually help modulate the amount of B activity. They can make it more, they can make it less. You have to have some kind of a check and balance to keep your immune system from overdoing it. And both B and T cells can become memory cells. Certain types of lymphocytes, B and Ts, are called memory cells, and they can last for a year. They can last for 10 years. You know, a year is like a flu vaccine. 10 years is like a tetanus shot. Or a lifetime, like a smallpox vaccination. Or if you've had chicken pox before, you don't get chicken pox again. Now that virus is still active in other forms, but some diseases you only get once in a lifetime. So, your production of T and B lymphocytes, you have to recognize the antigen, you have to create the right kind of lymphocyte, you then have to have that lymphocyte produce the right kind of antibody and release it. So it's a cascade of events. This is another one of those deals where you want a cascade because you don't want it running all the time, because you'd have autoimmune diseases like mad. What you want to do is have it held in check except when you need it and then suddenly released to help you out. Once you develop a couple of these B cells that have recognized an antigen and are going to make antibodies for that antigen, suddenly you need 1 million of them. So clonal diversification means they clone themselves. You suddenly make a whole bunch of them. And, you know, generally they start out in the bone marrow. You know, both B and T cells and every other kind of blood cell starts out being made in the bone marrow. But B cells have a tendency to then migrate to the lymph nodes, to the lymphatic tissues. T cells to the thymus, thymus with a T, T cells in the thymus. And they wait there. They're called immunocompetent, meaning they're ready to be activated, but they don't know what to be activated against yet. And then once they are exposed to an antigen, they mature and start doing that. The T cells then will seek out that antigen. The B cells will start making the antibody for that antigen. So these early forms of the cells go into the thymus and lymphatic system. Exposure to an antigen causes them to mature the rest of the way. B cells in particular, once they mature and start doing their thing, are called plasma cells. They can move into the plasma. They can release stuff into the plasma. They're no longer restricted to the lymphatic system, and so they have become mature and are releasing their products into your bloodstream. T cells, thymus. They have antigen-specific receptors. When they bind that antigen, they become a cell that will only look for that antigen. Differentiation of B cells into active cells producing antibodies called plasma cells. And then the T cells become active seekers of that antigen, cytotoxic cells, killer T cells. Differentiated B becomes a plasma cell. It can only respond to that first antigen that it was ever responded to. If you need immunity against a different antigen, you're going to have to make a different set of B cells. Unfortunately, we can't make a B cell that will respond to a broad range of antigens. Otherwise, we could come up with a flu shot that would last a lifetime, because the flu virus morphs every year into a slightly different one that has different antigens that aren't recognized by last year's B cells. They're waiting for the flu that you were immunized against last year, and they'll never see that one again because it's already changed into a different kind of flu. And so you have to get a flu shot every year. Here we have an antigen, binds to a B cell. The helper T helps turn the B cell into a plasma cell. That plasma cell then will start releasing the antibodies for that antigen. T cell activation, when there's an antigen around, they will become active for that antigen and start seeking it. When there's a B cell that has an antigen bound, a helper T will bind with that B cell and help turn it into a plasma cell. Other types of regulatory helper Ts, though, will suppress B cells when they're not needed so much, so that you won't have an overproduction of immune response or immune responses that can't be controlled. And like I said, Bs and Ts can all become memory cells, not all types, but you can have memory Bs and memory Ts which can last as long as a lifetime. And what they are is ready to attack that same antigen if it ever comes in again. You get a vaccination against smallpox. Smallpox vaccinations are pretty much good for a lifetime, although smallpox has been eradicated now. But you got a shot, you would create memory cells that are ready to produce that antibody. And if somebody was exposed to smallpox again, it's a virus, those antibodies would immediately bind to it and you would kill it before you got sick. A primary response means it's the first time you've ever seen the antigen. So a flu virus comes, you breathe it in. You respond to the antigen. Runaway sepsis, they can have infections that are very hard to treat because their immune systems don't help out very much. Maternal antibodies go in there and help to begin with, so that whatever mom was immune to, the baby is probably going to be immune to for a while, because right before birth, the immune response system, which has been suppressed during the whole pregnancy to keep you from attacking your baby, suddenly sends a lot of antibodies into the child, so it's got a chance until its own immune system can pick up. Get some more antibodies from that initial milk, the clear colostrum milk, which doesn't have a lot of fat in it yet because the baby can't digest it, but it has a lot of antibodies. Here, the maternal circulation, the antibodies are actually being taken in by endocytosis and moving into the fetal circulation. You can see right at birth, maternal immunoglobulins go way up, and it helps support the baby's immune system until the baby's immune system can pick up some. At about 6 to 8 months, the child's immune system becomes mature enough that they can take over their own immune responsibilities. Old people, their immune system gets weak. They have fewer T cells. Their memory B cells start to die out. I mean, you know, they last a long time, but if you live to be 90, you're expecting a lot out of a single cell to live 90 years. So a lot of them have died out by now. You have fewer antibodies. You have more autoantibodies, antibodies that have become slightly distorted over time and might see part of your own body as foreign and attack you. As a result, old people have more chronic inflammation, rheumatoid arthritis. Some of the autoimmune inflammatory diseases are old people's diseases. And that's that. Thank you very much.